Welcome back to Between Bells. I'm Nora Ali. The spread of the coronavirus is revealing an important link in our food system: immigrants, who are essential for the food supply chain to run smoothly. Joining me now is Daniel Costa, Director of Immigration Law and Policy Research at the Economic Policy Institute. Daniel, great to have you here with us today. Give us an idea of just how much immigrant populations actually make up the agricultural workforce.
Yeah, hi, and thanks so much for having me on. When we were talking about agriculture, a very high percentage are actually immigrants, something like, more than 70%. But the real issue is that about half of them are actually unauthorized immigrants. In the workplace, they actually have very few labor rights. And then you're talking about another 10% who are temporary migrant workers. These are workers who are employed through the H-2A visa program. So these are so-called non-immigrant visas. They don't allow them to stay permanently, and they're also tied to one employer, which leads to some real abuses and workplace issues because they can't switch jobs if something goes wrong. Something goes wrong with their job, like they don't get paid the right wage or they don't have adequate health and safety protection. So that's a real issue. I mean, there's still a quarter of the workforce that is U.S. born, and they also have to deal with poor conditions and low pay as well. And then you have about another quarter, 20% to a quarter, who are immigrants, but who are here lawfully. Either they're permanent residents or they're naturalized U.S. citizens.
Daniel, can you help to contextualize why the agriculture system, the food system, has become so reliant on immigrant work, and especially without providing them with the benefits?
Uh, it's hard to say, but the agriculture and meat processing have had low paid, exploitable workers for a long time. It hasn't always been immigrants. But the fact of the matter is, that many of at least when it comes to meat processing, many of those companies have moved to states where there are fewer labor rights and lower minimum wages. And that's been a big part of moving out there so that they can have access to more exploitable, underpaid labor. And over the last couple of decades, immigrants have stopped coming, or come fewer of them have come to the traditional states where they used to come to, like California, New York, and now many are actually going to the South and the Midwest. And then refugees, that's another immigrant workforce that has also moved to many of those places. Sometimes they're actually resettled there, and many of the jobs that are actually available are these meat processing plants.
Daniel, as you mentioned, this piece of the workforce is not as protected as others might be. And as President Trump is essentially ordering meat processing facilities to remain open as an essential business, what are the biggest concerns, the biggest risks to immigration populations right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pandemic has kind of exposed just how vulnerable many low-wage workers are, but immigrant workers have this added issue of having immigration status to worry about. And it's interesting, one example of, kind of what's happened is the administration has moved heaven and earth to make sure that migrant workers are still arriving on farms through this H-2A visa program I mentioned. But at the same time, they've taken virtually no action at all to increase protection or workplace safety for them. And because of immigration status, many immigrant workers, like the undocumented workers, are left out completely when it comes to the social safety net. So, for instance, undocumented workers, even if they've been here for 30 years, even if they've been paying taxes every year with an ITIN number, they can't take advantage of the $1,200 stimulus payment, and they also can't get unemployment insurance.
And for a lot of these employees, they have to decide if they go to work and potentially risk their health versus not to continue getting paid. And a lot of these immigrant workers do support people outside of their immediate family, outside of their household. So, what kind of options or cost benefit analysis are these people doing? And what options do they really have when their health is at risk if they do have to go to work?
Well, they have very few options, to be honest. I mean, if we're talking about how much these workers earn, for example, nationwide, the average farm worker last year only earned $14 an hour. That was a few cents less than workers without a high school diploma, and almost $5 less than workers with only a high school diploma. And the farm worker wage was only 60%, about 3/5 of what non-supervisory workers outside of agriculture make. So you take the workers that are most comparable to farm workers outside of agriculture, they only make 3/5. So we're talking about very low wages here, very few options, usually very few benefits. Only about less than a third, slightly less than a third of farm workers have employer-provided health coverage. So not a lot of options. And then when you're talking about meat processing workers, they're not doing much better either. Last year, there's three major meat cutter or sort of meat processing occupations, according to the Labor Department. One of them, the nationwide average wage was $16 an hour. One was $13.85 an hour. One was $14.23 an hour. So you're talking about jobs that are $14, $15 an hour for the most part, often not a lot of benefits. And keep in mind, just for perspective on what those wages mean. Many people in the United States think that $15 an hour should be the nationwide minimum wage, and Democrats in Congress have passed a bill to that effect. So basically, most of these workers are earning what would be the minimum wage if we had a normal minimum wage in this country. But basically, they're really poverty level wages in many cases, and quite often without benefits.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for shedding a light on this story. That's Daniel Costa, Director of Immigration Law and Policy Research at the Economic Policy Institute.